Laura Wright arrived at the edge of the territory with less than she'd left with and more silence than she knew how to carry. The house sat a mile and a half beyond the last proper fence line, where the dirt road narrowed into two ruts, pressed into hard earth by wagons that no longer passed this way. It was a modest place, one story. Pine boards weathered silver by sun and wind. A stone chimney, leaning just enough to make a careful person uneasy. The land around it stretched wide and spare, broken by scrub oak and pale grass that bent low under the weight of winter. It was not beautiful in the way towns advertised themselves, but it was quiet. And quiet, Laura believed, might help her. She had been married 7 years, widowed for less than wine. Her husband, Thomas Wright, had died beneath the collapsed timber in a copper mine, 2 counties east. The foreman called it an accident. The company sent a letter, and $40 folded inside. By the time the body was buried, Thomas's family had already decided Laura carried bad fortune in her blood. No one said it outright, but the glances lingered, and invitations stopped coming. A widow without children was a woman without an anchor. So Laura sold what little remained, packed her belongings into 2 crates, and followed a land broker west, who spoke with the smooth confidence of a man who never planned to stay long enough to face consequences. "This place is clean," he told her, tapping a finger against the folded deed. "No liens, no disputes. Folks around here are moving on, that's all." Laura wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. The land cost her nearly everything she had left, $420 for the house, and 40 acres that rolled out behind it, toward a low ridge. The paperwork looked official enough. Stamps, signatures, seals. She had learned after Thomas's death that grief made a person careless. She told herself she was being cautious now. For the first few weeks, life settled into a pattern. Laura rose before sunrise, fed the chickens she'd bought from a neighbor down the road, and hauled water from the well until her arms burned. She scrubbed the floors, patched the roof where snow had worked its way in, and planted a narrow winter garden behind the house, stubbornly pressing seeds into cold soil, as if daring it to give something back. At night, the wind carried strange sounds across the land. Not voices exactly, more like movement. Hooves sometimes. Once, she found one of her fence posts, pulled loose and laid flat on the ground. The rope cut clean through. She fixed it herself and didn't mention it when she rode into town for supplies. In town, people were polite in the way strangers often are, when they don't intend to know you long. Conversations stopped when she entered the mercantile. The postmaster hesitated when she gave her address, his pen pausing just a second too long. "You live out past Willow Draw?" he asked. "Yes," Laura said. He nodded once, slowly. Cold country. That was all he offered. By early winter, Laura noticed the markers at the edge of her land didn't stay where she placed them. Stones shifted. Wooden stakes vanished. She told herself it was animals or careless riders passing through. The alternative that someone else believed they belonged there felt too heavy to hold. The truth was, Laura already felt like a trespasser. The house creaked at night, the way old houses do, but sometimes the sounds felt deliberate. A floorboard would groan in a room she hadn't entered all day. The back door latch rattled once, as if tested by a hand that knew its weight. She slept with a broom beside the bed, not because she thought it would stop anything, but because holding something made the dark easier to face. Laura had lived long enough among men to know when silence wasn't peace, it was warning. Still, she stayed. She stayed because leaving would mean admitting she had been fooled again. Stayed because this land, unsettled as it felt, did not look at her with pity. Stayed because the grief she carried followed her no matter how far she went. And at least here, it had room to breathe. On the afternoon the storm came. The ski dropped low and gray, pressing against the hills as if it meant to crush them flat. Snow began to fall thick and fast, driven sideways by wind sharp enough to cut through wool. Laura secured the shutters and stoked the stove until the iron glowed dull red. By nightfall, the world beyond her windows had disappeared. That was when she heard the knocking. Not polite, not cautious. 3 hard blows, heavy enough to shake the door in its frame. Laura froze, her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. No one came this way in weather like this. No one sane, anyway. The broom was already in her hand when the knocking came again, louder, closer, as if the storm itself had learned how to knock. "Go away," she called, her voice thin but steady. "There's no one here." A pause. Then a voice, rough, slurred, edged with pain, pushed through the door and the wind behind it. "Wife," the man said. "Oh, open the door." Laura stepped back, heart pounding hard enough to bruise. Whoever stood on her porch was lost or drunk or dangerous, or all 3. And whatever peace she'd hoped to find on this land, she understood in that moment, had never truly belonged to her at all. The knocking came again, harder this time. Not polite, not uncertain. It struck the door in 3 dull, brutal blows, like bone meeting bone. The thin wooden frame shuddered, and snow hissed through the cracks as if the storm itself were clawing to get inside. Laura tightened her grip on the broom until her knuckles burned. "I said go away," she shouted, forcing steadiness into her voice. "There's nothing here for you." Outside, the wind answered for him, roaring low and furious across the open land. It swept the yard in long white gusts, erasing fence posts and horizon alike. For a brief, fragile moment, Laura thought the man might turn back, swallowed by the storm. Just another shadow lost to the snow. Then something struck the door again. Not a fist this time, a body. The impact came heavy and off balance, followed by a hoarse breath dragged painfully through the cold. "Wife," a man's voice slurred. "Wife, open up." Laura's heart slammed against her ribs. "I'm not your wife," she snapped. "You've got the wrong house." A rough, humorless chuckle followed. "Don't do that," the man said. "Not tonight." The latch rattled. Laura stumbled backward, just as the door burst inward. Snow and freezing air poured into the room, the lamp flickering as the wind rushed past her skirts. A man staggered across the threshold, dragging the storm in with him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders hunched beneath exhaustion and drink. His coat hung open, stiff with ice and darkened at one sleeve where blood had soaked through. Snow clung to his hair, which fell loose and black around his face. He nearly collapsed, catching himself on the doorframe with a muttered curse and a language Laura didn't recognize. "Get out," she screamed, swinging the broom up between them. "Get out of my house." He lifted his head slowly. His face was battered, one eye swollen nearly shut, a deep cut splitting his cheek. Dried blood cracked against his skin. But it was his eyes that rooted her in place. Dark, unsteady, and burning with something that felt far older than anger. "There you are," he murmured as if to himself. "I knew you'd be here." Laura struck him with the broom, jabbing at his chest. The blow barely registered. He swayed but stayed upright. "Don't touch me," she shouted. "I don't know you." He looked down at the broom, blinking, then back at her. Confusion crossed his face, chased by something like grief. "Don't play like that," he said quietly. "Not tonight." He stepped farther inside. The door swung shut behind him, with a hollow final sound that echoed through Laura's bones. She backed away until her shoulders hit the far wall. "I'll scream," she warned. "I'll scream until someone comes." He glanced around the room, slow and deliberate. The stove, the table, the lamp by the window. His gaze lingered on the hearth, then drifted down the narrow hallway. "No one's coming," he said. "Storm like this, you know that." She did know, and the truth of it made her chest ache. "You're drunk," Laura said. "You don't know where you are." The man's mouth twisted. "I know exactly where I am." He walked past her, as if she were nothing more than misplaced furniture. Laura rushed after him, swinging the broom again, striking his arm. This time he hissed sharply, his hand flying to the wounded sleeve. "Don't," he snapped, sudden steel cutting through the fog in his voice. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Then why are you here?" she demanded, fear finally catching up with her, hands shaking despite her grip. He stopped at the doorway to the bedroom. "Our room," he said. Laura felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not funny." He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The lamp cast a soft glow over the narrow bed, the quilt neatly folded at the foot. He crossed the room without hesitation, every step certain, as though guided by memory instead of sight. Laura stood frozen in the doorway as he sat on the edge of the bed, then lowered himself fully onto it with a rough groan. Pain pulled at his features now, the fight draining out of him. "This is my house," he said, voice hoarse but clearer. "You're standing on my land." "That's impossible," Laura shot back, her voice sharp and brittle. "I bought this place. I have the deed." He closed his eyes. They sold what wasn't theirs. She wanted to argue, to shout, to demand answers. But before she could speak again, his shoulders sagged. His head tipped back against the wall, breath slowing, uneven but deep. Within seconds, he was asleep. Just like that. Laura stood there, stunned, the broom hanging uselessly at her side. The man, this stranger, this intruder, lay sprawled across her bed, boots still on, chest rising and falling with the heavy rhythm of someone who had gone too long without rest. Snow whispered against the windows. The stove popped softly behind her. She didn't touch him. Instead, she dragged a chair into the corner of the room and sat down hard, pulling the broom across her knees like a guard posted at some forgotten frontier. Her eyes never left him. All night she watched. She watched his face twitch in troubled dreams, heard him murmur words she couldn't understand, prayers and curses tangled together. Once, he reached out blindly, fingers curling as if searching for someone long gone. "Wife," he whispered again. Barely sound at all. Laura's arms ached. Her eyes burned. Sleep never came. By the time dawn crept pale and cold through the frost-laced window, her fear had settled into something heavier, an awful sinking certainty. This land had never been empty. And whatever claim she thought she had, it was breathing quietly in her bed, waiting to wake. Morning came thin and colorless, the storm spent but not gone, leaving the land locked beneath a hard white stillness. Laura woke with a sharp ache in her neck, and the bitter taste of fear still clinging to the back of her tongue. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only the weight of the broom across her lap, the chair biting into her spine. Then she heard him breathe. The man lay sprawled across her bed, exactly where he had fallen, boots still on the quilt, one arm flung over his chest as if guarding something unseen. In the pale light slipping through the frost-laced window, his injuries looked worse than they had in the dark. Deep bruises flowered along his ribs in shades of purple and yellow. His knuckles were split and swollen, raw skin cracked open. Dried blood traced his temple and tangled in his hair. He stirred, frowning, as though the world itself had offended him. Samuel opened his eyes slowly. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. His gaze drifted across the room, the dresser Laura had hauled in herself, the patched curtain she'd sewn from flour sacks, the unfamiliar lamp on the nightstand. Confusion crept over his face, followed by something like Shion. Then he saw her. Laura shot to her feet so fast the chair scraped loudly across the floor. She raised the broom again, instinct taking over before reason could catch up. "Don't move," she said. Samuel winced, not at the threat, but at the sound of her voice. He pushed himself upright carefully, breath hissing through clenched teeth. "Looks like I already did," he muttered. "You broke into my house," Laura said. "You frightened me half to death." He dragged a hand down his face and stopped when his fingers brushed a cut. He stared at the blood on his skin, as if surprised to find it there. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said quietly. "I didn't even mean to drink that much." "That's supposed to help," she snapped. He glanced at the broom, then back at her. "You can put that down. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have waited for morning." She hesitated, then lowered it an inch. "Who are you?" "Samuel," he said after a moment. "Samuel Yazzie." The name settled into the room, heavy and unfamiliar. "This house," he went on, gesturing weakly around him, "used to be mine." Laura shook her head. "That's not possible. I bought it. I paid for it. I have papers." "So did they," Samuel replied. "Didn't make it right." He spoke without drama, his voice rough and tired. The land had belonged to his family, passed through Apache law, memory and blood, not through deeds stamped in ink. After his wife died buried on the ridge behind the house he left. Couldn't breathe here anymore. While he was gone, men came with documents and smiles and sold what they had no right to sell. Laura felt the room tilt. "So I was lied to," she said softly. Samuel nodded. "You weren't the first." "And the sheriff?" she asked. "The law?" A bitter curve touched his mouth. "The law listens to paper." Silence pressed in, thick and unavoidable. "If this goes to court," Laura said slowly, "they'll throw you off. Or worse." "They've tried before," Samuel said. "That's why I don't stay in town long." She studied his battered hands. "Is that why you were drunk?" He exhaled through his nose, a humorless sound. "That's part of it." She crossed her arms. "The rest?" Samuel looked away, jaw tightening. "I went to the saloon last night," he said. "Didn't plan to drink much. Just wanted to sit somewhere warm where no one knew me." "That didn't work," Laura said. "No." His voice dropped. "A man recognized me. Started talking about the land. About how it was finally cleaned up." Laura's stomach tightened. "I told him to stop," Samuel went on. "He didn't. Said things about my wife. About how she was better off dead than buried on stolen ground." His hands curled slowly into fists. "I don't remember throwing the first punch," he said, "but I remember the last one." Laura swallowed. The image rose unbidden blood on sawdust, a room full of men pretending not to see. "You walked all the way out here like that?" she asked. Samuel shrugged and immediately winced. "Didn't have much choice. The snow started falling before I left town. I was halfway here before I realized how bad I was bleeding." "And you came here?" she said. He nodded. "This place has a way of pulling me back, even when I don't want it to." Laura let out a slow breath. She thought of the broker's easy smile, of the postmaster's pen hesitating over her name, of the fence markers that shifted overnight. "There's a way," she said finally. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." And she told him what she knew of the law, just enough to understand where it tangled itself into knots. Marriage between a white woman and an Apache man, complicated things officials preferred not to untangle quickly. Evictions stalled. Claims froze. Time stretched. Samuel stared at her. "You'd marry me?" "On paper," she said sharply. "Don't flatter yourself." He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're braver than you look." "I'm tired of being fooled," she replied. "If we're going to fight this, we fight together." They wrote it out on scrap paper at the kitchen table, hands stiff from cold. A simple agreement. A partnership. If the land was secured, it would be divided evenly. No promises beyond survival. Samuel signed first. Laura followed, her name steady despite the pounding of her heart. They shook hands. Only then did Laura notice him swaying. "You should sit," she said. He waved her off, then nearly collapsed when he tried to stand. Laura lunged forward and caught his arm. The contact sent a strange jolt through her warmth, tension, awareness she didn't have words for. "Sit," she ordered. He obeyed. She fetched water from the stove, heated just enough to steam, and a tin of salve from her supplies. Samuel watched her quietly as she knelt in front of him and rolled up his sleeve. "This might sting," she warned. "I earned it," he said. As she cleaned the cut along his arm, he sucked in a sharp breath, and his hand closed reflexively around her wrist. Not hard, but firm, instinctive. Laura froze, pulse hammering. Samuel realized at once and released her. "Sorry." "It's all right," she said, though her voice betrayed her. "Just don't do that again." She finished tending his wounds, her fingers careful, almost reverent. Beneath her touch, he was solid and warm. A man who had carried grief and anger far longer than he admitted. When she stood, he said quietly, "Thank you." Laura nodded, unsure what to do with the tightness in her chest. Outside, the sun climbed higher, glinting off untouched snow. The land waited. And somehow, against all sense, so did they. The paper they had signed lay folded in Laura's apron pocket for ease, warm from her body, heavier than it had any right to be. On it, their names stood side by side, Samuel Yazzie and Laura Wright. Uneven ink pressed into cheap paper. A marriage that existed only because the world outside the house made it necessary. Inside the house, pretending took on a life of its own. Samuel stayed. At first, they moved around each other like cautious animals, sharing the same shelter. Laura rose early, as she always had, keeping to her chores, measuring her steps so they would not brush his. Samuel slept late, his body still healing, his movements careful and quiet when he did wake. They spoke little, but not out of hostility. It was more a shared understanding that words once spoken could not be taken back. When people from town came by, first the sheriff, then a land agent, sniffing around with false politeness, Samuel stood close to Laura, his hand settling lightly at her back, steady and familiar in a way that surprised them both. Laura learned to lean into the touch without flinching. She learned the weight of him beside her, the subtle shift of his stance when he sensed trouble before it spoke aloud. "Mrs. Yazzie," the sheriff said once, testing the sound of it. Laura answered without hesitation. "Yes, sir." That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Samuel breathe from the other side of the wall, and wondered when the lie had begun to feel so natural. As winter loosened its grip, the days lengthened. Laura insisted on planting the garden again, though the soil was stubborn and half-frozen. Samuel helped without being asked, hauling water from the well, fixing the sagging fence along the back edge of the land. They worked side by side in quiet rhythm, boots sinking into thawing earth. One afternoon, while Samuel struggled with an old pipe that refused to seal, the water burst loose without warning. A sharp spray shot sideways, soaking Laura from waist to hem. She yelped, stumbling back, skirts clinging heavy and cold. "Samuel!" she shouted. He looked up, startled, and then he laughed. Not a guarded smile, not a polite exhale, but a full, open laugh that seemed to catch him by surprise, as much as it did her. "Oh, that's funny," Laura said, narrowing her eyes. Before he could react, she grabbed the hose and swung it toward him. Water splashed across his chest, darkening his shirt. He cursed and lunged for the pipe, missing, and the spray caught him square in the face. "Careful," he warned, grinning now. "You'll regret that." "I already regret trusting you with tools," she shot back. They chased each other across the yard like children who had forgotten their own age. Laura slipped once in the mud, and Samuel caught her around the waist, steadying her. For a breath, neither of them moved. Water dripped from her hair, His hands were firm, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. She laughed first, breathless. "Let go before I change my mind and hit you with this." He released her slowly, his smile softer now, something thoughtful behind it. That evening they sat near the stove, damp clothes hung to dry, sharing a simple meal. Laura realized she had not laughed like that since before Thomas died. The thought startled her, but she did not push it away. Nights grew quieter. They talked more than not about the land or the law, but small things. Stories from childhood, half-remembered songs. Laura learned that Samuel slept lightly, waking at the slightest sound. Samuel learned that Laura sometimes talked in her sleep, murmuring apologies to no one at all. One night, the wind rattled the windows hard enough to wake her. She sat up, heart racing, and before she could think better of it, crossed the hall and knocked on Samuel's door. "It's just the wind," he said gently, already awake. "I know," she replied. He opened the door wider. "Come sit. You don't have to explain." They sat on the edge of his bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. Laura could feel the heat of him through her sleeve, steady and grounding. Without looking at her, Samuel said, "I don't dream much anymore. But when I do, I don't like being alone afterward." She understood that more than she wanted to admit. The first time they crossed the line, it was neither planned nor dramatic. It was late. The house was warm, the fire low. Laura stood to leave, and Samuel caught her hand, not sudden, not rough, just enough to ask the question he could not bring himself to voice. She did not pull away. They kissed slowly, cautiously, as if learning the shape of something fragile. Laura felt the tension in him, the restraint. When she rested her forehead against his, he whispered, "We don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I want to." Their first night together was quiet, deliberate, no rush, no hunger that burned too fast. Just hands exploring carefully, bodies listening to one another. Laura felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with need. Samuel held her as though she might disappear if he let go. In the morning, light spilled soft and gold across the floor. Laura woke with Samuel's arm around her waist, his breath warm against her shoulder. For one fleeting moment, there was no past and no threat, only the weight of another human being beside her. Then she remembered the paper in her pocket. She lay still, staring at the wall, wondering when pretending had become something else and whether either of them knew how to stop. Outside, the land stretched quiet and watchful as it always had. The trouble did not come all at once. It crept in slowly, the way doubt always does, quiet, patient, certain it would be noticed eventually. Laura began to see it in the small things. Samuel would stop at the threshold of the back room sometimes, his hand resting against the doorframe, as if he'd forgotten why he'd gone there. Once, she caught him standing in the yard at Frisky, staring toward the low ridge behind the house, where the land rose and fell like a long-held breath. When she called his name, he startled, then smiled as though nothing had happened. At night, after they lay together, he sometimes turned away too quickly. Not cold, never unkind, just distant in a way Laura recognized too well. She told herself she was imagining it. Then one afternoon, while Samuel was in town speaking with a clerk about the land records, Laura went looking for twine in the storage chest beneath the bed. She found it there wrapped carefully in cloth, the color of old sand. A small beaded necklace, the work fine and deliberate. Beside it, a folded scrap of leather with a name pressed into it, worn smooth by touch. She did not need to ask whose it was. When Samuel returned, she did not mention what she'd found. She watched him instead, watched the way his eyes softened when the fire burned low, watched how his voice changed when he thought of the land, careful and reverent. That night, he dreamed. Laura woke to the sound of his breath hitching, his hand tightening at her waist. Then he spoke soft, broken, not meant for her ears. The name was not Laura's. She lay there long after his breathing steadied, staring into the dark, her chest tight with a familiar ache. It was the same hollow feeling she had known after Thomas died, when she realized she had loved a man whose life no longer had room for her. By morning, the decision had already taken shape. They ate in silence. Samuel noticed. Of course, he noticed everything, but he did not press. When Laura finished, she stood and said, "We need to talk." He nodded. "All right." She did not sit. "I found her things," she said. His face went still. "I should have told you." "Yes," Laura replied. "You should have." The words that followed came sharper than she intended. But once started, they refused to stop. She spoke of the necklace, of the name in his sleep, of the way he seemed to vanish into memories she could not touch. "I understand grief," she said. "I understand holding on. But I won't be a substitute, Samuel. I won't live in someone else's shadow." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That silence broke something in her. "So that's it," she said. "You don't even deny it." "I don't know how," he said quietly. Her laugh was thin, brittle. "That's honest at least." She told him she would leave once the land matter was settled, that the agreement would stand, but nothing more, that she would not pretend on paper or in bed any longer. Samuel did not stop her. That hurt more than anything else. The days that followed were heavy with unsaid things. They moved around each other carefully now, like strangers who shared a memory neither could claim. At night, Laura slept alone. She listened to the house settle and thought of all the ways she had been wrong before, all the men who had needed her to be less than she was. On the fourth night, the argument came not loud but fierce in its restraint. "You think I don't see it," Laura said. "You think I don't know what it feels like to be chosen second?" Samuel's hands curled at his sides. "I never chose you second." "You never chose me first," she shot back. That stopped him. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the fear there raw, unguarded. "If I chose you," he said, voice rough, "they'd take everything from you. I won't do that." "I didn't ask you to protect me," Laura said. "I asked you to be honest." He ran a hand over his face, the gesture tired, familiar. "You think I keep her things because I'm waiting to go back," he said. "I keep them because if I let them go, I'm afraid I'll forget who I was before the world decided I didn't belong." Laura's anger wavered, but she held fast. "And where does that leave me?" He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. "It leaves you with me," he said. "If you'll have it." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "I won't be the woman you cling to because the past won't let you sleep." Something in his expression broke then, not loudly, not all at once, but enough. "You're wrong," he said. "I don't cling to you because of the past. I hold back because of it." He told her then about the threats, the violence, the men who had taken pieces of his life, one demand at a time. He told her he was afraid that loving her openly would mark her, make her a target, turn her into another thing he had failed to protect. "I'd rather lose you by choice," he said, "than watch you lose everything because of me." Laura stared at him, breath trembling. "You don't get to decide that alone." The truth settled between them, heavy and unavoidable. They were not broken because of love. They were broken because of fear. And outside, the land waited, as it always had, for them to decide whether staying was worth the cost. The men came at dawn, as they always did when they meant to be taken seriously. Laura saw them first from the kitchen window, 3 riders moving slow and deliberate along the fence line, their horses cutting dark shapes against the pale ground. One wore a city coat too fine for dust. Another, carried a leather satchel that bounced against his thigh with every step. Paper men, she thought. The most dangerous kind. Samuel stood beside her, already awake, already still. They won't stop this time, he said. Laura set the coffee pot down without answering. Her hands did not shake. She had lived too long in fear to let it have her now. The riders dismounted at the gate. The man with the satchel stepped forward, his boots clean, his voice practiced. Samuel Yazzie, he called. We're here to resolve the matter of unlawful occupation. Samuel did not move. Laura did. She stepped onto the porch, the cold biting through her sleeves, and stood between the men and the door. I'm Laura Yazzie, she said. This is my home. The man glanced down at his papers. Ma'am, this land has been sold twice over in the last 5 years. Your arrangement doesn't alter that. It does, Laura replied evenly, and reached into her apron pocket. She had not told Samuel what she meant to do, not because she wanted to surprise him, but because she knew he would try to stop her. She handed the man the folded document, a marriage certificate, properly witnessed, properly signed. Not the scrap of paper they'd written weeks ago, but a legal declaration she had ridden into town to file herself the day after their argument. The man frowned, scanning the page. You understand what this means? Yes, Laura said. I understand exactly. It meant scrutiny. It meant whispers. It meant that wherever Samuel went, she would be marked too. It meant choosing a life that could not be folded away when it became inconvenient. Samuel's voice came low behind her. Laura. She did not turn. I chose to stay, she said, with or without your permission. The man cleared his throat. This complicates matters. That's the point, Laura said. There was a long pause. Horses shifted. Wind moved through dry grass. Finally, the man folded the paper back into his satchel. We'll have to review, he said stiffly. Until then, no action will be taken. They rode away without another word. Laura stood there until the sound of hooves faded into nothing. Only then did she breathe. Samuel came to her slowly, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast. You didn't have to do that. Yes, she said softly. I did. He searched her face, his own tight with something like awe and fear. You know what this costs. I know what leaving costs, she replied. I've paid it before. They stood there a long moment, the land stretching wide and quiet around them. For the first time, it did not feel like it was holding its breath. Weeks passed. The officials returned once more, then stopped coming altogether. Papers moved slowly through channels that preferred to avoid attention. The land was listed jointly, not seized, not sold, left alone. Samuel did not celebrate. He repaired the fence. He planted trees along the ridge where the soil was thin. He stayed. Laura watched him from the porch one evening, the light low and gold, and realized something had shifted. Not the danger, it was still there, but the weight of it. It no longer rested on her chest alone. One night, as spring crept in, soft and green, Samuel came inside and set a small bundle on the table. What's that? Laura asked. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay the beaded necklace she had found weeks before. I'm burying it, he said, not to forget, just to let it rest. She nodded. I'll come with you. They walked to the ridge together under a sky just beginning to show stars. Samuel dug with his hands, slow and deliberate. When the earth closed over the necklace, he stayed still for a long time. I loved her, he said quietly. I know, Laura replied. And I love you, he said, not rushed, not pleading, just true. Laura rested her forehead against his shoulder. Then don't protect me from your life, she said. Let me live it with you. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her, as the night settled in around them. They married again that summer, this time with witnesses. No fine clothes, no speeches, just a few neighbors, a shared meal, and vows spoken plain and honest. The land bore witness, the way it always had. Samuel did not become less Apache because he stayed. Laura did not become less herself because she chose him. They built a life that belonged to neither world entirely, and both. Years later, when the field stood tall and the house rang with laughter, Laura would think back to the night of the storm, the knocking, the fear, the man who had fallen into her life broken and drunk and lost. She would remember how close she'd come to sending him back into the snow. Instead, she had opened the door. And in doing so, she had found not just a place to stand, but someone willing to stand with her, on land that no longer asked who it belonged to, only who would stay.